Shortly before midnight, Brother Hildebrand shuffles past with a lantern and a urine bucket, the medieval equivalent of a coffee break. He offers a silent thumbs up. Conversation would be sinful, but apparently gesturing with bodily fluids in hand is perfectly orthodox. You contemplate asking to use the facilities yourself, decide against it, then remember you are allowed to think freely. Only speech is fined. In an act of petty rebellion, you mentally recite the entire recipe for rabbit stew, extra garlic, picturing the abbot sneezing at a sudden phantom aroma. The vow of silence may bind tongues, but it cannot bind imagination, and yours slithers happily into heretical territory. Midnight Matins arrives like an unwanted second dinner invitation. The bell rings thrice, a cue for everyone to rise, kneel again, then stand in place while reciting psalms with the fervor of half-deflated bagpipes. A visiting Franciscan, unaware of local custom, begins to hum aloud. Brother Silas thwacks him on the ankle with a prayer stool, and the hum transforms into a heartfelt mime of contrition. You, newcomer, stand near the back where the candlelight barely reaches, observing the choreography of devotion and spinal discomfort. Somewhere a mouse scurries beneath the pews collecting crumbs of communion wafer, the only creature in the room assured of a decent meal. When the service ends, you shuffle to the calefactory, the one room allowed a serious fire, hoping for warmth and perhaps a scandalous sip of weak ale. Instead, you find Brother Wolfstan stirring a cauldron of something grayish that identifies as soup, only in the broadest metaphysical sense. He ladles you a portion, solemnly mouths bonum noctem, which you assume means good night, but might equally translate to prepare thy bowels. The flavor suggests boiled parchment with top notes of remorse. Still, you swallow gratefully, knowing dawn's breakfast will be identical but colder. Black humor aside, the monastery's food philosophy is simple. Keep everyone alive, but just barely, so that death remains a tempting alternative to sin. Sated in the loosest sense, you return to the scriptorium. The candle stub has collapsed like an exhausted slug, so you light another and immediately regret the brightness. The ink has separated into pigment and watery gloom. You stir it with a quill tip, then drag fresh letters across the page, each stroke a squeak like a terrified mouse. Outside, owls trade gossip about your terrible penmanship. Inside, Brother Osbert snores on his stool, chin tucked, breath rattling like a wheezy organ. You consider drawing glasses on his face with soot. Tempting, but vandalism invites extra chores. Instead, you tuck a fresh page beneath his quill so that when he wakes, he might think the Holy Spirit finished the sermon for him. Little miracles keep morale high. Somewhere around the 4th hour past sunset, your senses fray. The candlelight halos fine dust motes that drift like uncommitted souls. Ink blotches morph into tiny demon faces. You salute them politely. The night has a way of stretching. Seconds sprawl into minutes. Minutes imitate geologic epochs. You decide to stand and stretch, twisting your spine until it pops like an overripe berry, earning a frowned blessing from Saint Benedict's statue. A distant thunder roll reminds you that outside these walls, the world still spins, fields ripen, thieves lurk, and taverns serve wine to people who can talk without penalty. You suspect this vow of silence was invented by an abbot desperate for uninterrupted sleep, packaged later as a spiritual discipline. Near 2 in the morning, you finish your assigned folio, blot it dry, and lay it atop the pile. The parchment stack now resembles a mortuary slab, Each page a chalk-pale cadaver waiting for binding. Your ink-stained fingers ache. The smell of iron gall ink will not leave your nails for a week. You flex them, then scratch a note on scrap parchment. Remember to pray for the sinners who invented italic script. Satisfied, you extinguish the candle with a hiss, plunging the room into pre-dawn gloom. For a moment, the silence is not imposed, but chosen, thick enough to spread on rye bread. You shuffle toward your cell. Down the hall, Brother Hildebrand has dropped the urine bucket. A small yellow lake glistens on the stones. He signals apology with a shrug, large enough to endanger his spine. You tiptoe around the puddle, reflecting that medieval sainthood is mostly a matter of surviving hygiene. At your door, you pause, inhale the faint aroma of straw and penitence, and vow to dream of warm tavern fires and conversation louder than a whisper. The tower bell will ring lauds soon enough, dragging you back to wakefulness and more holy scribbling. For now, you slip onto the straw pallet, pull the thin blanket over your ears, and let the monastery's creaks and sighs lull you toward sleep. Silent, yes, but hardly peaceful. End of chapter 1, and not a spoken word spilled. Well, almost. Gong for lauds rips through your shallow sleep like a rusty anchor through a rowboat. 3 iron keels that vibrate the floorboards, and the region of your skull reserved for regrettable memories. You sit up in darkness so complete it feels pre-invented, knocking your forehead on the sloping ceiling of the broom closet turned cell. Somewhere outside, a cock crows with the croaky timbre of a lifelong smoker. Possibly the same rooster the cook threatened to turn into soup yesterday, but then forgot, because the vow of silence makes menu debates awkward. You grope for your sandals, discover one now doubles as accommodation for a slug, and decide tonight you'll store them on a shelf, assuming the shelf hasn't already been claimed by mold. Corridor torches hiss to life one by one, lit by Brother Amalric, the appointed fire marshal, mainly because he once survived an accidental bonfire of hymnals without screaming. The rule of silence permits exactly 5 words in an emergency, so Amalric paces the hallway, rehearsing fire, flee, repent afterward, in case the roof ignites again. Lantern glow drips through archways, illuminating monks queuing like sorrowful chess pieces toward the chapel. You join the procession, each footstep a soft slap on stone, the only permitted percussion. The cold bites through your robe. In an act of self-soothing, you imagine today's breakfast might include bread still young enough to remember wheat. Inside the chapel, a blue dusk lurks in the clear story windows, as though dawn itself is eavesdropping before deciding whether to bother rising. The community kneels. 100 knees crack, echoing like popcorn in purgatory. Antor signals the silent psalm by raising 2 crooked fingers. The room promptly lip-syncs the entire 63rd psalm in perfect mute unison, an uncanny pageant of moving mouths and suppressed flatulence. You mouth along, pausing at "My soul thirsts for thee," to wonder if souls also fancy weak ale at breakfast. Brother Everard, the obese sacristan, dozes in mid-kneel. Gravity nudges him sideways, but he rights himself with a grunt that costs him 3 Hail Marys on tomorrow's word count ledger. Lauds concludes with a precise communal exhale, like the monastery itself has been holding its breath since matins. You shuffle to the refectory. The tables are narrow planks perched on trestles, the benches narrower. They appear designed less for comfort and more for encouraging brevity in meal times. Brother Godric ladles porridge into earthenware bowls. It has the viscosity of remorse and the color of wet cardboard. As you accept your portion, he winks, technically heretical flirting under strict Benedictine etiquette, but no one can indict a wink without speaking, so it has become the preferred medium for scandal. You add exactly 2 grains of salt, mindful that last month the abbot delivered a 30-minute homily on the sin of lavish seasoning. The morning reader mounts the pulpit, scroll in hand, and begins reciting a homily on humility, aloud, because reading is exempt from silence. His voice, high and nasal, saws through the air while spoons scrape bowls, a duet of penitence and dental erosion. Midway, he mispronounces superfluity as superfluity, prompting several monks to stare at the ceiling in pious agony. No one may correct him, so the error hangs like a damp tapestry until the end of the meal. You swallow the last gummy spoonful and consider chewing the bowl for added fiber. After dishes are washed in water that looks like it faintly remembers soap, the work assignments are posted. You are on herb garden duty until terse, then back to the scriptorium for an inventory of quills. Brother Prior, a skeletal authority who smells of licorice and disappointment, hands you a wooden spade so splintered it resembles a crime scene. Outside, dawn finally leaks over the walls, painting the clouds the color of bruised peaches. In the garden, lavender and rue battle for survival against a strategic alliance of slugs and theological neglect. Your task is to weed, but first you must identify which plants are weeds. An ambiguous science here, as last year, Brother Hugo accidentally uprooted the entire medicinal bed, mistaking it for a heresy. You kneel on frosty soil, tugging at dandelions while maintaining monastic silence, which is difficult because dandelions fight back with smug tenacity. Your breath fogs into miniature sermons that vanish before they can convict you. At one point, you extract a root so large it could double as an apostolic relic. You hold it aloft like an exorcised demon until Brother Silas shakes his head, indicating it was actually a prize parsnip. You replant it upside down out of spite and pray nobody notices until harvest. Somewhere near the wall, novices practice illuminated capitals on slate boards, sketching enormous scarlet initials, while the master scribe critiques with a birch switch for punctuation. Terce bell rings. You return spade and muddy kneeler, then hustle to the scriptorium, fingertips numb, knees debating mutiny. Inside, the air tastes of ink, mildew, and that special despair endemic to large unfinished projects. A heap of goose feathers awaits trimming. Your job is to sort them by stiffness like a hairdresser for birds. Brother Osbert, miraculously awake, explains via frantic gestures that yesterday's sermon stack has vanished. Panic flickers across his cataract-fogged eyes. He points to the empty shelf, then mimes burning. You both imagine a catastrophic scenario, a stray spark from Amalric's torch, igniting the words of St. Augustine, producing holy barbecue. You scour the room until the mystery resolves in anticlimax. The abbot borrowed the stack to lecture novices on rhetorical flourish, then left it in the cloister where a playful gust scattered sermons like confetti for celestial wedding guests. Pages now cling to hedges, statuary, and one unfortunate goose. Retrieving them costs you an hour and 2 unauthorized chuckles. By sext, you have reassembled the manuscript, albeit reshuffled. Someone's treatise on temperance now ends with the vivid description of illicit cheese. You shrug. The mashup feels modern, even edgy. Lunch is lentil pottage, lentils being cheaper than penance and equally effective at producing suffering. The reader drones from a register of saintly miracles, stonings, martyrdoms, voluntary starvation, while your intestines supply a counterpoint. Across the table, Brother Wolfstan slides you a note beneath his bowl. A crude drawing of a stick monk dangling from gallows labeled hangry. You stifle a snort, converting it into a sudden cough that surprises even you. The hall freezes, eyes swivel. The abbot narrows his gaze, chalking another tick in his ledger of nocturnal penances. You accept your fate. 3 extra psalms at vigils, payable in silence, of course. Work resumes under a sky now spitting drizzle, as though heaven couldn't commit to outright weeping. You assist Brother Tostig in the infirmary, where the day's patients include a novice with quill hand cramps, a lay brother racing the Black Death in slow motion, inflamed armpit boils, but he's optimistic, and a rooster with existential dread. Sister Euphemia, a visiting nurse from the neighboring convent, communicates by banging wooden spoons together because cross-gender speech is strictly curtailed. She diagnoses the rooster with mal de plume and prescribes rest, an ironic treatment for a creature whose entire job is shouting at dawn. None of this stops the monastery's daily routine, which ticks along with grim punctuality. Vesper's bell drags you from the infirmary to the chapel again. Candles sputter, casting shadows that dance like mildly intoxicated angels. The community stands, making the sign of the cross. You do likewise, forgetting ink stains still web your fingers and imprint a temporary tattoo of Gothic letters on your forehead. No mirror exists to warn you, but Brother Godric's widened eyes inform you that somewhere between Amin and Et cum spiritu tuo, you have become a living rubricated manuscript. After Vespers, there is a rare treat, an evening lecture by the abbot on the virtues of silence, delivered paradoxically in an hour of uninterrupted speech. He paces the chapter house, robes fluttering like a large, indignant gull, extolling the spiritual benefits of keeping one's tongue still. You listen, ironically grateful for the noise. Human vowels feel almost scandalous after so many whispered hours. The abbot quotes the Desert Fathers, Saint Jerome, and unexpectedly, a fisherman he met once who swore so creatively it converted 3 bystanders. His point, if any, drowns in verbiage, but the performance is mesmerizing. At the end, he dismisses you with a flourish, reminding everyone that tomorrow is fast day. No meat, dairy, or facial expressions of joy. Compline approaches. You slip outside for a breath of fresh air, unadulterated by incense. The courtyard glistens, puddles catching torchlight like shards of molten gold. A stray cat weaves between your ankles, purring in open defiance of the vow of silence. You scratch its head, committing a minor breach of ascetic austerity by indulging in softness. Somewhere above, thunder grumbles. You imagine God clearing his throat before another sermon, and you vow privately to nod, whether or not you understand a single word. Returning indoors, you pass the calefactory. Brother Wolfstan stands by the hearth, roasting chestnuts he found in the abbot's private pantry. He offers you one, silently, of course, and you accept, holding the hot nut until it cools to edible humility. The flavor is scandalously pleasant. Wulfstan grins, eyes sparkling with the mischief of a man who could start a reformation with a well-timed snack. You part with an equally silent nod, a conspiracy forged in roasted starch. Compline itself is mercifully brief. The final knell fades, leaving the abbey wrapped in hush. You extinguish candles in the scriptorium, stoppies to whisper a single forbidden word, tomorrow, into the darkness just to hear yourself. It feels reckless, luxurious, heart-thumping. The vow broken by one syllable tastes sweeter than Wulfstan's chestnut. You hurry away before the stone walls can tattletale. In your cell, you collapse onto the straw pallet. Rain rat-tats the roof like impatient fingers. You close your eyes, sure that within moments some bell will drag you upright again. But for now you savor the illicit memory of speech and the echo of your own voice. Proof, however fleeting, that beneath the rule-book and robes, you are still defiantly, noisily alive. You will later blame the moon, an oversized pewter coin wobbling above the roof tiles, for everything that follows. But when the small bell for the Gravetide Vigil jangles, you are already awake, fighting straw splinters that itch like unresolved sins. The rule says brothers may sleep in their tunics to save time dressing. The unspoken corollary is that fleas also save time dining. You scratch, sit up, and notice the corridor candle is guttering, spitting sparks the way a drunk knight spits opinions. A prudent guest would tighten the leather shutter on his door and feign sacred slumber. You, alas, have been conscripted for special errands, a phrase so vague it practically exhales brimstone. By Brother Celarius, cellarmaster and clandestine king of fermented mishaps. Through the cloister you pad, sandals flapping soft sarcasm against stone. Every shadow looks like a monk who forgot to say amen, and is now condemned to haunt archways. Brother Celarius intercepts you beside the refectory hatch, eyes gleaming with the manic devotion of a man who loves two things: God and dairy gone rogue. Without words, he thrusts a cheese wheel into your arms, a squat cylinder wrapped in linen and hubris. It stinks of salted apocalypse. You nearly gag, but Celarius only taps the side lovingly, as though introducing you to a newborn antichrist, then gestures toward the infirmary. The assignment is clear. Smuggle this heretical fromage to Sister Euphemia, whose medical credo holds that mold cures more ills than prayer. You nod, praying the cheese doesn't achieve sentience en route. Crossing the courtyard, you rehearse excuses should the abbot catch you. Emergency poultice, experimental penance, holy relic of Saint Lactose. Rain has quit for now, leaving puddles that mirror the moon so perfectly you half expect a tiny choir to float inside them, chanting off-key. A cat, possibly the same one you indulged earlier, trots alongside, attracted by the cheese's malignant perfume. You whisper shoo, forgetting the vow. The word slithers into the night like a guilty eel. Somewhere a ledger quivers, sensing fresh ink. You slip through the infirmary door. Sister Euphemia emerges from the shadows, wielding a mortar and a look of professional despair. She cracks the cheese linen, inhales, and smiles, the way executioners must when sharpening a blade. Swift gestures instruct you to grate half the wheel into a pot of simmering nettle broth, apparently a tonic for boils, melancholy, and inconvenient chastity. The grater squeals, shedding sparks of rind that smell like remorse left in the sun. The broth burps emerald bubbles. The sister nods approval while writing a prescription on a wax tablet. Take internally if you dare, otherwise apply to enemy. Task complete, you back away, only to collide with Brother Amalric, his torch fizzing dangerously close to your sleeve. His eyebrows leap at the sight of illicit dairy, then plunge into a scowl. You brace for denunciation, but he simply produces a wedge of bread, breaks it in two, and offers you the larger piece. Torchlight reveals crumb fossils of last week's lentil pottage. Still, the gesture feels like a knightly oath. You trade half your bread for a scrap of cheese and mime zipping lips. Amalric nods, tucks contraband into his sleeve, and ambles off to check fire buckets, whistling through closed teeth. Technically a loophole in the silence rule. Returning to your cell should be straightforward, yet monastic architecture specializes in labyrinths that shift underfoot like moral certainty. A wrong turn delivers you to the library's iron-bound door, slightly ajar. Inside glows a single lamp, haloing dust motes that drift like heresies too small to excommunicate. Curiosity, first cousin to original sin, drags you across the threshold. Brother Osbert stands on a stool, rummaging the highest shelf, muttering forbidden syllables that sound suspiciously like, "Where the blazes?" You clear your throat. He startles, overturns a stack of hymnals, and crashes to the floor in a papier-mâché avalanche. In the chaos, your candle snuffs, plunging the room into pitch, accented by Osbert's whispered litany of medieval profanity. Together, you grope for fallen volumes. One cracked spine disgorges a parchment map of the Mediterranean, edges nibbled by generations of mice seeking a warmer climate. Osbert thrusts it at you excitedly. According to marginalia, it charts trade routes for spice, and more interestingly, wine. He points to an annotation: Cyprus, sweet commandaria for gout and gloom. The implication is clear. Locate Cyprus, locate liquid joy. You shake your head, reminding him with vigorous mime that importing joy violates at least 3 chapters of the rule. He counters by arching one eyebrow so high it threatens to defect. You relent, pocket the map, and vow to forget you ever met Cyprus. On the way out, a loose floorboard squeaks an alarm. Torches flare in the hallway. Brother Prior, skeletal and sleepless, patrols like a wraith. You and Osbert freeze, clutching books like shields. Prior peers in, nose twitching for heresy. Silence stretches until it snaps. Somewhere a rat knocks over a jar, glass shatters, and Prior pivots toward the noise, stalking away. You exhale, inventing a silent prayer of gratitude to Saint Rodent the Distracting. Osbert mouths safe, then begins shelving with exaggerated care. You leave before fate demands another offering. Back in the cloister, the small hours drag their feet. Wind whistles Gregorian scales through broken shutters. You consider sleep, yet dread the straw pallet now that the fleas have filed property claims. Instead, you drift toward the calefactory, drawn by heat and the faint crackle of conspiracy. Inside, Brother Wulfstan presides over a clandestine symposium. Amalric, Godric, and even Everard, the heavy sacristan, cluster around the hearth, passing a clay jug that steams like a baptismal font, possessed by spirits. They welcome you with nods, no words, but the jug finds your hands. You sip hot mulled ale spiced with stolen nutmeg. It tastes like heresy steeped in courage. Somebody has bribed the vow of silence into allowing communal humming. A low, tuneless drone fills the room, gooseflesh raising and oddly comforting. Wulfstan passes around slivers of the cheese you delivered. It has ripened in the last hour from pungent to downright evangelical. The group nibbles in reverent awe. Godric signs a cross with a fragment of rind. Amalric responds by toasting the Lord's questionable generosity. The hymnless humming swells, still silent but vibrating liver and conscience alike. For a moment, the monastery ceases to be a factory of penance and becomes a secret brotherhood dedicated to warmth, drink, and the sacrament of bad decisions. Inevitably, joy courts disaster. The jug empties. Wolfstand sets it on the hearth where it chooses this moment to crack explosively, spraying ale into the flames. Fire whooshes up the chimney with a roar, like the devil clearing his throat. Sparks snow across the rush-strewn floor. Amalric lunges for the bucket brigade, but collides with Everard's stomach. Both collapse, releasing a belch that could register on seismographs. You grab a blanket, smother the sparks, and stomp like a one-man Morris dance. Smoke alarms the resident ravens roosting in the rafters. They flap into the courtyard, cawing Latin profanity. The abbot arrives, barefoot, eyes blazing brighter than the hearth. His gaze inventories the scene: shattered jug, scorched blanket, monks reeking of spiced felonies. He inhales, ready to unleash a homily that will strip paint from the walls. But before sound emerges, Wolfstand steps forward, offers the abbot a morsel of cheese with the gravity of a hostage negotiation. The abbot hesitates, then, perhaps hoping to salvage dignity, accepts. He chews. Expressions flit across his face: suspicion, surprise, ecstasy, immediate regret. The cheese's aftertaste detonates. He manages a strangled whimper, then pivots and stalks out, robe billowing like an offended cumulonimbus. The silence decree, by some miracle, remains intact. No one spoke, yet you suspect new rules will bloom at dawn like toadstools on a corpse. Cleanup consumes the remains of night. You scour soot from flagstones while Wolfstand scrapes cheese shards off the hearth, muttering penitential arithmetic. 3 psalms per gram. Amalric patches the cracked jug with beeswax. It looks wounded, but proud. Everard attempts to polish his reputation by hauling fresh firewood, but collapses on the 3rd trip, claiming divine vertigo. By cock-crow, you are all exhausted, sweaty, and bonded by shared felony. The bell for Prime will ring soon, calling everyone to pretend nothing happened, as though virtue were a cloak that can be shrugged on over burnt sleeves. You detour to the Cloister garden, seeking a breath uncensored by smoke. Dawn has finally committed, painting the eastern cloud banks pink, the ecclesiastical color of joyful penance. Dew beads on lavender stalks like tiny glass absolutions. In the distance, the abbot's window slams, doubtless composing fresh statutes against nocturnal gastronomy. You smile, tuck the contraband map deeper into your belt, and whisper another forbidden word: Cypress, letting it dissolve into cool air. The cat materializes, tail erect, mews approval. You scratch its chin and vow that tonight, should sleeplessness return, you might just chart a course across parchment oceans, sailing on ink and quiet rebellion toward islands fragrant with grapes and possibilities. For now, Prime's bell clanks. You square your shoulders, practicing the innocent expression of a saint who has never heard of cheese, wine, or firestorms. With luck, and a new layer of candle soot to mask any remaining odor, you will pass inspection. And if not, you console yourself. Even the strictest abbot cannot confiscate a whispered dream of Cyprus. You join the procession of bleary monks, feet shuffling rhythmically. Another day beginning under vows, both binding and, occasionally, deliciously negotiable. Prime begins with the abbot's cough echoing through the nave like a musket misfiring at dawn. 50 robes rustle as you shuffle into ranks, eyes gritty, shoulders smelling faintly of illicit nutmeg. The abbot mounts the pulpit, clutching a parchment scroll so long it drags behind him like a wounded banner. He clears his throat, twice for emphasis, and unspools the document until it brushes his sandals. By torchlight, he proclaims 8 fresh statutes, each designed to ensure last night never happens again. Statute 1. No fires in the calefactory after Vespers. Statute 2. No dairy products of suspicious temperament. Statute 3. Any humming, whistling, or rhythmic breathing shall be punished by triple silence. Statutes 4 through 7 concern buckets, ravens, and the precise definition of whiff. Statute 8 forbids all foreign cartography, which you suspect is targeted directly at the Cyprus map warming your belt. Each mandate lands like a stone in a well, ripples of suppressed groans spread across the choir stalls. Breakfast, in prophetic alignment with fast day, is downgraded from watery porridge to barley water, essentially porridge after a divorce. Brother Godric ladles the grey broth with the solemnity of a funeral director. You sip, tasting hints of grass, regret, and something that might be pencil shavings. Still, you raise the bowl in silent toast to your tablemates. Brother Everard tips his barely filled cup and manages not to weep, though his wobbling jowls compose a sad litany. The reader at the lectern mangles a passage on the virtue of abstinence, substituting chastity with chastity belt 3 times before anyone dares blink. When the abbot nods approval, you realize humor is now contraband. Assignments follow. You are posted to the stables with Brother Crispin, caretaker of 1 mule, 2 donkeys, and an ox named Melancholy. Crispin communicates exclusively through eyebrow semaphore, an efficient language for complaining without sound. The mule greets you by sneezing hay into your face, then turning to present a theological argument from its hind quarters. You fetch a pitchfork, shovel last night's equine epiphanies into a wheelbarrow, and trundle them toward the compost heap, wondering whether sins, like manure, eventually blossom into something useful. Crispin points at the sky, storm clouds massing like a council of bishops, and raises both brows in a gesture meaning either rain or apocalypse. Experience suggests both. Rain arrives as a disciplined drizzle, soaking your cowl and plastering hair to skull. Wheelbarrow grips slick with mud. You slide past the herb garden where novices pluck rue beneath hastily erected tarps. One whispers, "Blessed drizzle," before remembering the vow. The slap of his own palm to mouth is louder than the words were. Further on, the scriptorium windows glow. Inside, Brother Osbert and the copyists are already transcribing the new edicts onto vellum, faces pinched like overtaxed accountants. A raven perches on the sill, tilting its head as if critiquing their kerning. At Terce, chapel pews creak beneath damp habits. The chant, silent of course, feels heavier today, as though each unspoken syllable must drag the weight of unsmelled cheese. Behind the high altar, incense smoke drifts in lazy spirals, failing to erase the lingering scent of scorched ale. You kneel, pretend piety, and mentally rehearse your evening escape route, should Cyprus become imperative. Near the apse, Brother Amalric's torch-honed profile resembles a carved gargoyle. He catches your eye, then scratches his nose with a finger, shaped unmistakably like a map's compass arrow. Message received. The conspiracy lives. Work resumes under a sky that can't decide whether to weep or brood. You're transferred to laundry duty. Apparently, the abbot believes smoke-stained robes are gateways to vanity. The laundry hut squats beside the river, its interior steamed like a drunken sauna. Brother Wolfstan supervises, stirring cauldrons with an ore scavenged from a Viking relic. Soap flakes swirl amid brown water, each bubble popping with a sigh of martyrdom. Wolfstan gestures for you to feed the fire, but Statute 1 forbids cheerful flames. You compromise by piling wood slowly, coaxing a miserable smolder that radiates the enthusiasm of a dying sermon. Midway through ringing a cassock, a herald's trumpet blares from the gatehouse, 3 uncertain notes, as if the instrument distrusts its own news. Word spreads in rapid silence. A bishop is arriving for surprise inspection. Panic ripples. Monks dash about, brandishing brooms like swords. Someone flings open all windows to air out the monastery. Unfortunately, the wind sucks in, not out, carrying the laundry hut's steamy stench towards the refectory, where it merges with barley breath into a fragrance best described as ecclesiastical damp. The abbot assembles everyone in the courtyard under a dripping gutter, outlines a plan using a chalkboard and pure glower. We are to appear pious, disciplined, and above all silent, as if we have swallowed our own tongues for the glory of God. His exact phrasing. Brother Pryor distributes emergency tasks. Osbert will guide the bishop through the library, all scandalous maps hidden under lock and key. Godric will oversee the kitchen. No spices, no cheese, no flavor. And you, newest scapegoat, are ordered to prepare the guest chamber. This involves replacing straw mattresses, polishing a tarnished candlestick until it reflects your sins, and removing any evidence of last night's merriment. You pocket 2 stray nutmeg seeds before sweeping, because hope needs seasoning. Whilst fluffing the mattress, a process akin to resurrecting a deceased hedgehog, you discover an old pilgrim badge of St. Lawrence tucked in the ticking. The irony of a martyr grilled alive on a gridiron found on fast day is not lost on you. You tuck the relic into your sleeve. Maybe the bishop collects dark jokes. A knock, soft but urgent, interrupts your moral ruminations. It's Sister Euphemia, cloak dripping, carrying a wicker basket that leaks noxious vapors. Inside, jars of nettle cheese poultice for the bishop's rumored gout. She winks, deposits the basket beneath the bed, and departs, leaving the room smelling faintly of herbal sedition. The bishop arrives earlier than scheduled, preceded by a mule-drawn cart burdened with trunks and a single ominous coffer. He dismounts wearing silk gloves and an expression suggesting he's just bitten into a lemon and found politics inside. The abbot greets him with a bow so low his vertebrae audibly repent. Formalities unspool in Latin too baroque for silence, so they resort to exaggerated gestures. Handshake for welcome, hand over heart for piety, discreet nostril pinch for what's that smell? The bishop glances around, head cocked like a falcon assessing prey, then smiles thinly. Inspection begins. You shadow the entourage at a respectful distance, noting every twitch of the bishop's eyebrow. Library. He lingers at the locked cabinet, pats it affectionately, perhaps suspicious of what sleeps inside. Refectory. He sniffs the barley water, grimaces, scribbles a note. Scriptorium. He praises industrious quills, missing the doodle of a dancing cheese wedge in the margin of his praise. All proceeds too smoothly. Tension coils. Disaster chooses the stable yard as its stage. Melancholy the ox, spooked by thunder, backs into the bishop's cart, toppling the ominous coffer. Lid bursts open, revealing ornate silver chalices, gifts meant to impress. A donkey named Benedictine seizes its moment, grips a chalice handle in yellow teeth, and bolts through the gate. Panic erupts. Monks scatter, chasing donkey, chalice, and dignity. Without thinking, you shout, "Stop that blessed beast!" 3 forbidden words loud enough to splash against the cloister walls. Silence detonates. Every head swivels. The abbot's jaw drops. Prior's quill snaps. The bishop's eyes widen with a mixture of scandal and relief that someone else finally spoke. The donkey continues its pilgrimage across muddy fields, sacred silver clanking like a portable mass. You sprint, sandals flailing, heart thundering. Rain returns, heavier, turning the path to batter. Benedictine dodges between gravestones, kicks up clods of sanctified turf. You lunge, grasp its tail, slide face first into a puddle, and taste consecrated mud. The donkey brays triumph, but a sudden appearance of the courtyard cat, emerging from nowhere like a furry deus ex machina, startles the animal into a sharp turn. It drops the chalice, which lands in your lap with a thunk. You clutch it, dripping, victorious, and humiliated. By the time you stagger back, monks have formed a silent semicircle, expressions ranging from awe to schadenfreude. The bishop steps forward, raises an eyebrow, and, contrary to expectation, applauds. The single clap echoes. Emboldened, he nods to the abbot. A necessary breach, I dare say. Charity must occasionally shout. The abbot swallows rage behind a crumbling smile. You kneel, present the mud-lacquered chalice. The bishop, with a theatrical flourish, wipes it on the abbot's sleeve and inspects the shine. Satisfied, he tucks it under an arm and declares inspection complete, praising the monastery's lively spirit. Evening descends with weary irony. Vespers includes a special prayer for temperance and beast management. The abbot announces, voice trembling, that henceforth donkeys will be tethered after none, and guests must declare all cheese at the gate. He then sentences you to 3 nights of silent reflection in the bell tower, an honor disguised as punishment. You accept, bow deeply, and climb the narrow spiral steps as sunset burns the clouds crimson. At the top, among ropes thick as ship hawsers, you find unexpected sanctuary. The tower window frames distant hills washed gold. The wind carries scents of wet earth and lavender, not cheese. You sit on a wooden bench, retrieve the cypress map, unfold it beneath flickering candlelight. Lines of ink trace seas that glimmer with possibility. Below, the monastery exhales into night. Bells at rest, vows reset. You smile, whisper the island's name once more. Cyprus, feeling the word roll free and rich on your tongue. Somewhere in the courtyard, Benedictine answers with a bray that sounds remarkably like laughter. Dawn creeps across the bell tower slit like a timid parishioner, and you, court-martialed to this altitude for 3 nights, greet it with the romantic enthusiasm of a spider in a baptismal font. The air up here tastes of bronze dust and pigeon gossip. Your first duty is to toll prime, a chore that requires you to seize a rope thicker than your thigh, whisper a quick apology to every vertebra, and heave until the bell's iron tongue smacks noon out of the morning. It answers with a boom that rattles your kidneys and scatters a flock of ravens whose sole theology is cawing at inconvenient hours. You count the beats, 1, 2, 3, then a 4th sneaks out because the rope slips in your blistered fists. Somewhere below, the abbot's quill snaps. Somewhere further below, Brother Everard assumes breakfast has been promoted to feast day. Between bells, you occupy yourself by cataloging graffiti carved into the tower's beams by previous penitents. Pray for rain, crossed out. Pray for wine, underlined twice, and in surprisingly elegant Lombardic script, "Beware the cheese." The admonition troubles you more than it should. To distract yourself, you peer through the arrow slit at the Cloister courtyard. The bishop, resplendent in purple, is conferring with the abbot over a scroll so long it needs its own page-turner. Judging by hand gestures, they are plotting either stricter silence or the invasion of Constantinople. The gust wafts their conversation upward, and if the donkey speaks again, excommunication. You resolve to warn Benedictine after Vespers. The second bell, tierce, arrives much sooner when you're the one dragging time forward by its rope. You ring, knees trembling, and decide to descend for water. Halfway down the spiral stair, a step, malicious with age, snaps. You pirouette in a flurry of wool and ill-chosen vocabulary, and land on a dusty loft wedged between tower and roof. Candlelight filters through warped shingles, revealing crates stamped with a sigil you recognize. The abbot's personal seal, a crozier entwined with grapes. Curiosity, already a repeat offender, drives you to prise open a lid. Inside, bottles of wine wink like buried rubies. Labels read Commandaria for ecclesiastical emergency only. Cypress stares up from every cork. You imagine marching downstairs, planting a bottle on the refectory table, and declaring an emergency of spirit. Instead, you slide one into your sleeve, purely for evidence, you assure your conscience, and notice a parchment packet taped beneath the lid. You unfold it to find a recipe titled Pear and Poppy Elixir to silence persistent critics. Ingredients include laudanum, honey, and one ripe pear, preferably stolen. Black humor twists your lips. Perhaps last night's decrees were drafted under the influence of fruit-based diplomacy. You ease back onto the stair, bottle clinking softly. At the ringing platform, Brother Amalric awaits, having ascended without footsteps like a canonical wraith. He hands you a scrap of vellum shaped like a raven feather. Inked upon it is the missing segment of your Cyprus map, coastline, anchorage, and a single word, tonight. He touches a finger to lips, then vanishes downward, robe fluttering in perfect silence. You tuck the fragment inside your robe where it pulses like a second heartbeat. Hours stretch. You toll sext. Sun climbs, then hides behind clouds the color of unfinished sermons. Wind sighs through bell mouths, producing a low moan that sounds suspiciously like the abbot's lecturing voice. Below, novices chase parchment pages that the breeze liberated from the scriptorium, each sheet bearing new statutes about mule muzzling or spice rationing. One page lodges in an herb bush. A cat pounces, shreds the law into illegal confetti, and prances away carrying a strip reading, "No flavo." Near none, the sky bruises deep green. Thunder grumbles. You brace for lightning, recalling how St. Barbara allegedly safeguards bell ringers. You are unconvinced she covers accidental arsonists. The storm breaks precisely as you yank the rope. A bolt spears the weather vane. Sparks cascade like fiery psalms, and static jolts up the bell cable into your arms. For an instant, you are a living tuning fork, vibrating with holy expletives. When sight returns, the storm has illuminated something on your map fragment. Lemon ink, writing now visible. Cellar tunnel beneath ox stall. Your punishment suddenly feels like an apprenticeship in espionage. You coil the rope, leave a decoy sandbag to mimic your weight should anyone glance up, and scuttle down the stairs. In the nave, monks are mopping storm water while chanting inside their heads. You slip behind a tapestry depicting Jonah mid-regurgitation and exit into the cloister unseen. The stables steam with wet straw and theological discontent. Melancholy, the ox eyes you as if to say, "Again?" You pat his horn, murmur soothing nonsense, and examine the floor. A trapdoor hides beneath a scattering of hay and one ironically pious horseshoe. You lift it to reveal a ladder descending into candle-scented gloom. Pocketing a taper, you climb down, closing the hatch overhead. Instantly, the air thickens with yeast and barrel must. Have discovered the monastery's true treasury, row upon row of casks, bottles, wheels of cheese aging like conspiracies, and crates of exotic spices embargoed by this morning's decree. In the center stands Brother Celarius, arms crossed, grin wider than the devil's ledger. He was expecting you. Apparently, every serious heresy in this abbey is invitation only. Beside him, Sister Euphemia sharpens a cheese knife on a whetstone, sparks leaping like argumentative footnotes. On a makeshift table rests a half-built compass, its needle fashioned from a sewing pin, its casing a hollowed nutmeg shell. Wolfstan emerges from behind barrels carrying a rolled sailcloth. The plan is clear without words. Steal away tonight through a river gate, board some trading barge, and exchange contraband cheese and wine for a future where speech is legal tender. You ought to object. Loyalty, vows, consequences. But the tower still hums in your bones, and the memory of barley water curdles courage. Instead, you produce the bottle of commandaria, placing it like a dowry upon the table. Celarius pops the cork. Aroma of sun-scorched vineyards floods the room, momentarily wiping mildew from existence. Cups clink, ceramic, wooden, one fashioned from a hollow turnip. You toast without speaking, each swallow a silent vow to improbable freedom. Rehearsal follows. At Compline's final candle, you will feign penitential pacing, unlock the postern, and cough twice, allowed under medical exemption, to signal the others. Amalric will smuggle the donkey as pack animal because no one suspects repeat offenders. The cat, designated morale officer, will ride atop the cheese cart to distract any guard who likes pets more than rules. Euphemia will carry her poultices as medicinal supplies. The bishop's chalice, newly polished, will serve as bribe should worldly authorities inquire. The bell for vespers booms overhead, reminding you that conspiracy tastes better when hot. You ascend, latch the trap door, replace the hay. Crispin, the stable master, enters just as you dust your hands. He raises eyebrows in his native semaphore, demanding explanation. Thinking fast, you point to Melancholy's hindquarters and mime explosive digestion. Crispin recoils, waving you away, a universal dismissal. You slip out, heart hammering Morse code against ribs. Vespers passes in a blur of candle smoke and hypothetical alibis. The abbot's homily concerns obedience. Every metaphor feels personally sharpened. He concludes with a reminder that bells, like tongues, must be disciplined. You bow, suppress a grin, and glance at Amalric across the aisle. His torch flares once in reply. Twilight spills lavender shadows over Cloister walks. You climb the tower for your mandated solitude. Rain has rinsed the air. The horizon glows like molten coin. You ring Compline, savor the echo, then begin pacing the parapet visibly for any watchful eye. Inside, you count heartbeats. On the courtyard clock, crafted by monks who hate uncertainty, the minute hand slides to the appointed instant. You cough once, twice. Silence answers. You wait, stomach knotting itself into rosary beads until the faint creak of the postern hinge drifts up, followed by the soft clop of donkey hooves and the squeak of cart wheels. From the tower slit, you glimpse the procession. Amalric leading Benedictine draped in a burlap cassock. Euphemia steering the cart stacked with wheels of dubious holiness. Solarius hefting sacks that jingle like censers full of peppercorn. Wolfstan brandishing the rolled sail brings up the rear. They vanish through the orchard gate, swallowed by moonlit mist. You exhale, relief tasting of oak and risk. Duty remains. Ring the midnight bell to conceal their absence. Minutes creep. You rehearse your story, how you heard nothing, saw nothing, were praying too loudly to notice. The rope feels lighter now, as though conspiracy has shaved ounces from the hem. Midnight arrives. You toll once, twice, thrice, the proper number, and allow yourself a fourth, a secret salute to 5 fools on a cheese-scented odyssey. Below, the abbey settles. The bishop snores like distant thunder. The abbot dreams of statutes with smaller font. You sit by the open window, map unfolded on your knees, candle guttering low. Somewhere beyond these walls, a barge drifts downstream, sail catching the same wind that cools your face. You raise an imaginary cup of commandaria to the night, murmur the forbidden toast to voices unshackled, and let the echo whirl away into darkness, free as any pilgrim, sweet as stolen wine. First light thaws the monastery roofs to a tepid gray, and you, self-appointed sentinel of impossible secrets, descend from the bell tower yawning like a blocked organ pipe. The bells have been silent since midnight, their bronze throats still trembling with the echo of your clandestine salute. Yet as you reach the cloister walk, you realize the silence is wider, deeper, gnawing at door frames and echoing in empty sandals left higgledy-piggledy outside the dormitory. A head count begins itself inside your skull. Amalric, gone. Solarius, gone. Euphemia, gone, though technically she was never supposed to stay. Wolfstan, gone, along with his rolled sail, and Benedictine the donkey, whose bray once defined dawn more precisely than any bell, offers only absence. The courtyard feels peeled, as if the night has lifted a layer of skin. You try to behave as though this is none of your business, hands folded, eyes half-lidded in devotional boredom. You join the trickle of monks wandering toward the refectory. Brother Godric stands at the threshold, clutching a ladle like a question mark. He stares beyond you at the rows of missing bowls, then at the half-empty bench where Everard, slimmer by 1 chin this morning, sits in confused solitude. A vow of silence cannot stop eyebrows from holding a symposium, and soon the cloister bristles with furry punctuation, marks signaling confusion, suspicion, and the growing dread of collective blame. The abbot appears, a thundercloud stitched into a habit, dragging the bishop in his wake. They halt beside the fountain, droplets plash like nervous ellipses. The abbot raises 2 fingers for attention, then unfurls a freshly inked decree headed, "On the sudden disappearance of certain brethren and livestock." He points to each vacant spot on the refectory bench, then to the western gate, unlatched, its iron bar resting against the wall like a discarded commandment. Lastly, he glares at you. Perhaps he smells guilt beneath the damp wool. You answer with the placid gaze of a gargoyle carved without a mouth. Breakfast is cancelled, punitive fasting layered atop the scheduled fast. Instead, the abbot orders an immediate search. Library, scriptorium, carp pond. Even the onion beds are combed for hidden fugitives. You are assigned to the barn loft with Brother Crispin. The old stable keeper's eyebrows manage a frantic semaphore. Explain the donkey. You shrug, point at hoofprints leading riverward, palm skyward in helpless innocence. Crispin sighs so loudly it counts as speech. Jot one more Hail Mary into the cosmic ledger. While they scour hay bales, you linger at Melancholy the Ox, scratching the broad forehead in apology for recruiting his stall into subterranean conspiracy. With subtle toe, you prod the trap door. Secure hay respread, as though midnight tunnels were nothing but dream sediment. Yet a faint aroma of nutmeg and distant sea wind still coils upward. Cough to mask it, tasting equal parts relief and regret. The bishop, despite silk gloves now spotted with stable dust, insists on interrogating every corner of the grounds. He cannot speak to you without shattering his own sense of austere decorum, so he resorts to a theatrical form of charades. He mimes rowing, points at the river, clasps his hands in prayer, then tilts one palm like a cup. Wine. You shake your head with such earnest denial your neck cracks. Somewhere inside, an inner voice screams commandaria, but outwardly you cough again, this time purely theatrical, and press fingers to lips as if silence were your only language. Sext approaches. Bell duty returns you to the tower, which now feels less like a punishment and more like a citadel of plausible ignorance. You haul on the rope. Each toll vibrates through walls still quivering from last night's lightning shock. Between peals, you spy movement near the orchard. The cat, tail flagged like a triumphant banner, trots across the grass with a scrap of parchment in its mouth. No novice dares chase it. Feline sovereignty outranks minor orders. The cat crosses the Cloister walk, springs up the bell tower steps with supernatural agility, and deposits the note at your feet before curling round the rope coil to purr audibly, an offense under new Statute 3. But cats answer to no rule but hunger. You unfold the scrap. Ink, smeared by river spray, forms 3 words and a sigil of crossed spoons. Harbor by matins. Beneath, a doodle of Benedictine wearing a halo. You pocket the note, heart ricocheting like a loose clapper. If the fugitives reach the sea before dawn, they will vanish into trade routes older than the bishop's chasuble. If caught, they will return trussed like festival hogs. And you with them. None brings more rain, a laconic drizzle barely worth the stain. The abbot convenes an emergency chapter in the warming room, where a single reluctant fire sulks beneath damp logs. Statute 1 permits meager flames so long as they promote misery. He announces that all outer gates will be chained, all novices paired with seniors to prevent contagion of rebellion, and the bell tower will henceforth be manned by 2 brethren, one to ring, one to watch. He pairs you with Brother Osbert, whose clouded eyes might miss a stampede of war elephants, but whose hearing, sharpened by blindness, can identify the abbot's footfall at 50 paces. The arrangement feels like shackles disguised as companionship. Evening lurks, rain thickens, drumming on roof tiles with the persistence of a begging monk. While Osbert naps between Vespers and Compline, you study the Cyprus map by candle stub. The missing fragment, sewn back with spit and thread, reveals a modest harbor 2 days downstream. A tangle of warehouses, salt bark boats, and a single tavern marked with a tiny wheel of cheese. You imagine your companions raising smuggled goblets, toasting invisible you perched in your tower like a tragic gargoyle. Envy tastes hot, like wine mulled with shame. Compline arrives. Osbert shuffles up the steps, tapping the wall with a cane, more for ritual than guidance. Together you ring the hour, alternating pulls, so the bell voice remains steady. Courtyard below empties. Candles wink out one by one, until only the lamp in the abbot's window burns, a fiery pupil watching the dark. When Osbert dozes upright between rings, chin on chest, fingers still curled through rope, you seize your chance. You step onto the parapet, lean into the wind, and whistle, a single high trill masked by storm. Not a soul in the courtyard stirs, but far off, beyond the orchard, a lantern flashes twice, a firefly caught in a jar. The signal that the fugitives have not yet slipped beyond hope, or that they need help. Returning inside, you tuck Osbert's cloak tighter around his shoulders to ensure he sleeps on. Down the stair, corridors yawn empty. You navigate by memory through shadows until you reach the river gate, chain newly locked and sealed with wax bearing the abbot's ring. Silk-gloved clerical paranoia did not anticipate lock-picking monks, but you are unarmed save for a bent spoon, pilfered from the bishop's travel chest during stable confusion, now polished to sacrilegious brightness. Kneeling, you jiggle the lock. After a minute of prayer-shaped profanity, it clicks open like a small heresy. You slip outside, re-loop chain, press wax to hide your sin, and hurry to the bank where reeds whisper conspiracies with the current. Moonlight shards through scudding cloud banks. The river, swollen by storm, churns black and pewter. You follow hoofprints softened by rain until they vanish at a muddy slope, clear sign of donkey embarkation. A rotting punt lolls half-submerged nearby, and you, opportunist, push it free. Water slops over worn boards, still it floats in grudging obedience. You pole into the current, heart hammering, cat perched astern because apparently treason is a communal activity. Halfway across, you glimpse movement downstream. A barge, sail drooping like a soaked banner, wedged against a sandbar. Lantern flickers at the bow, silhouettes heave at ropes. You angle your punt toward them, praying the current's roar muffles the splash. As you draw near, Celarius's bulk looms, hauling Benedictine off the deck for a lighter draft. When he spots you, his mouth shapes a profanity so exquisite it deserves its own illumination. You scramble aboard. Euphemia grips your sleeve, eyes bright with relief and terror. "Row," she whispers, speech justified by medical emergency, you suppose. Wolfstan shoves the punt away. It spins into darkness like a discarded stanza. Together, you push poles, coaxing the barge free. Rain eases, wind freshens. The sail snaps, fills, and suddenly the vessel glides as if absolved. Onshore lanterns flare, monastic guards discovering the breach. A bell rings distantly, frantic and off-key. Osbert awake, tugging alone. The river bends, cliffs rising either side like closing salters. Arrows of torchlight comb the water but fade against night's ink. In the stern, Amalric unfurls a second, smaller sail, patched from monk robes and linen bandages. It billows, smelling of incense and laundry soap. The barge leaps forward, leaving behind a chorus of frustrated bells. Only when the monastery dwindles to a glow on the horizon do your muscles unclench. Celarius produces a flask. Commandaria kisses your lips, sweet as stolen absolution. Euphemia bandages your rope-burned palms, humming a lullaby technically banned by 3 councils. Benedictine chews cud contemplatively. The cat curls on a coil of rope, purring like a contented heresy. Above, clouds part to reveal stars, tiny pinholes in heaven's parchment. You lean against the gunwale, map spread across knees, candle shielded by Wolfstan's hat. The harbor by Matins lies still a day away, but the current is swift, the wind compliant, and the rule of silence floats upstream behind you, diluted with every ripple. Yet guilt travels too. Osbert alone in the tower, the abbot drafting new anathemas, novices scrubbing floors to atone for crimes they did not commit. Tomorrow, you vow, you will write them an apology. Anonymous, of course, perhaps hidden inside a package of cheese so pungent it proclaims your signature without a word. For now, the river rocks you into drowsy vigil, and as the cat's purr merges with the creak of timbers, you slip into half-sleep, dreaming of cypress vineyards and bells that ring for joy rather than obedience. Behind your eyelids, dawn is already pouring gold across a foreign harbor, and the first thing you do upon arrival, you promise yourself, will be to open your mouth and speak, out loud, unpunished, unhurried, in sentences long enough to taste like freedom. You reach the harbor just as the horizon tilts from ink to watered wine, a color that promises dawn, but might equally be food poisoning. The river spits you into a muddy estuary lined with rotten pilings and warehouses slumped like drunken friars after festival vespers. Masts clatter in the offshore breeze. Gulls orbit overhead, auditioning for the role of avenging angels. Your barge slides between two hulks, one leaking tar, the other leaking sailors, and kisses the wharf with a thud polite enough to fool saints. No trumpets greet you, only the hiss of rope against soaked wood and Benedictine's offended bray when a gull mistakes his ear for breakfast. Euphemia drops a plank across the gap. Wolfstan sweeps it with a theatrical bow, inviting you onto land that looks slightly less reputable than the river you just fled. A port warden materializes from the fog, quill poised like a dagger, eager for paperwork blood. He wears a tabard embroidered with a fish skeleton, the civic emblem of a town that taxes hope by the ounce. Name and cargo, he bleats, but Salarius counters with the bishop's polished chalice, brandished as though it were a holy relic with notarized indulgences. The warden's eyes widen to communion plate diameter. He coughs, adjusts his ledger to a blank page titled Special Donations, and waves you through with the enthusiasm of a pardoned sinner. Amalric tips an imaginary hat, then shoves the chalice back into the donkey's pannier, where it clinks against cheese wheels, aging more rapidly than theological arguments. You shuffle along the pier toward a tavern, advertised by a signboard depicting a cartwheeling cheese round in mortal combat with a compass rose. The wheel and compass smells of stale broth and recent knife fights, exactly the aroma your party was promised. Inside, a captain in violet hose nurses ale and a grudge against sobriety. Captain Isabel, twice knotted, de Alcaraz, so named for surviving two nooses, agrees to ferry modest pilgrims and their blessed dairy for a fee payable in spice, wine, and silence regarding certain maritime misunderstandings north of Antioch. Negotiations unfold in whispers and eyebrow areas until Isabel slaps the table, announcing she will sail by second tide. Any delays incur a surcharge denominated in kidneys. Euphemia nods, indicating she will gladly remove the captain's kidneys if necessary. An understanding is reached, sealed when the captain samples Salarius's smallest cheese, survives, and declares it miraculously sinful. Outside, the wharf erupts in commotion. A patrol boat flying the Abbey's ragged pennant has nosed into the basin, crewed by novice monks conscripted into the order of begrudging oarsmen. The prow stands the bishop, cassock plastered to his shins by spray, shouting curses elegant enough to pass as Latin. You curse the cat for its slow courier service and shove your companions into motion. Wulfstan shoulders the sail bundle. Amalric hauls Benedictine forward like a furry battering ram, and you scatter gulls with your map as though brandishing papal bulls. The first warehouse door yawns open. Inside, a ramp collapses under the donkey's weight, sending Benedictine sliding down a pile of hemp sacks and landing atop a crate of dried herring. The smell detonates, summoning every gull in Christendom into a feathery cyclone. Captain Isabel appears, sword drawn, slash-cutting gulls from the air while cursing them for poor table manners. She leads you through a maze of salt barrels that feels designed by a penitent cartographer on a deadline. Behind you, the bishop's voice bounces off stone walls. By the authority of the Fifth Council and one very annoyed abbot, halt! His novices, still vowed to silence, pursue without protest, which is to say they wheeze like broken bagpipes. Euphemia unlids a jar of nettle poultice and flings it behind her. The floor becomes a skating rink of medicinal slime. Two novices skid, collide, and achieve instantaneous martyrdom of dignity. The chase spits you onto Dock 7, where Isabel's cog, the Saint Apocrypha, rocks impatiently. Sailors heave lines while reciting a litany of knots that sound suspiciously obscene. You sprint up the gangplank. Celarius follows, arms full of cheese, looking like the world's worst juggler. Benedictine balks at the incline until Amalric whispers something the donkey finds either inspirational or blackmail-worthy. It charges aboard, nearly taking the mast with it. The gangplank is hauled in just as the bishop rounds the corner, face the color of martyr's blood. He raises a hand in benediction, or perhaps malediction. But Isabel's bosun looses the foresail. Canvas snaps, wind bellies, and the Saint Apocrypha surges clear, leaving the bishop's blessing to dissolve in brackish spray. You collapse against a coil of rope, lungs rioting. The harbor retreats, a watercolor smear of gray stone, accusatory bells and flustered gulls. Wulfstan unfurls the fugitive banner, a scrap of linen painted with a laughing wheel of cheese, and nails it to the mast just below a weather-beaten image of Saint Nicholas punching Arius. Celarius uncorks the commandaria, distributing drams in chipped metal cups. Isabel toasts to half-price miracles and full-price sins, then orders the helm hard to starboard, aiming for the tidal channel that will sling you toward open sea faster than any ecclesiastical writ can travel. As foam hisses along the hull, you climb to the stern castle, map flapping in your grip. Cyprus lies weeks away, but Isabel claims knowledge of currents that gossip in your favor. She sketches routes across invisible water, her finger leaving contrails in the damp air. Convoys, storms, pirate nests, each obstacle gets a curt flick, as though inconvenience were just another goal to swat. You ask about supplies. She shrugs and gestures to the donkey. We've got transport, milk, and emergency conversation. Benedictine brays, possibly objecting to being designated multifunctional cuisine. Below deck, Celarius establishes a floating Athene cave, stacking cheeses among ballast stones, convinced that ocean sway will endow them with epiphanies. Euphemia converts a storage locker into infirmary, hanging tinctures that slosh like vindictive spirits. Wolfstand patrols, testing planks for worrisome creeks. Each creek he baptizes with a drop of wine, a carpenter's prayer. Amalric volunteers for lookout, climbing the rigging despite his torch now being useless in daylight. You suspect he simply wants first claim on sunrise. Night approaches faster at sea. By second dog watch, the horizon bruises purple. Isabel orders lamps hooded. The coast bristles with revenue cutters hungry for contraband. From the forecastle you spy two silhouettes trailing. Abbey novices still rowing like damned souls, their boat ribboning wake in pointless devotion. When darkness thickens, Isabel signals. You extinguish lanterns, leaving only starlight and the faint phosphorescent wake, scribbling scripture no man can read. The novices vanish, swallowed by gloom or conscience. In the sudden quiet, Captain Isabel presses a parchment into your hand, a letter of marque from a Cypriot lordling you've never heard of, authorizing seizure of heretical dairy and suspect relics from northern waters. The parchment bears the same grape-entwined crozier seal as the abbot's crates. You stare, gears grinding. Has the abbot been smuggling under the bishop's nose, banking indulgences on sinful cheese? The captain grins, reading your face like an illuminated manuscript. Faith is a complicated ledger, she says. We merely audit the margins. Sleep finds you curled beside the cat, brine-soaked cloak for blanket, deck thumping a lullaby of muffled timbers. Somewhere aft, Benedictine and the Ox low in uneasy duet, perhaps debating ecclesiology. Overhead, the sails sigh, filled now with a wind that smells of citrus and southern stars. You close your eyes to the rhythmic creak, picturing vineyards tumbling toward a turquoise sea, bells that ring for market, not matins, and conversations loud enough to drown guilt. If tomorrow brings storms, so be it. At least you will face them with a voice unbound and a cheese that may yet achieve sainthood, or sink trying. Morning sneaks beneath the gunwale as a pale strip of pewter, but the Saint Apocrypha is already awake and swearing. The mainsail slaps like an angry psalter, while Captain Isabel bawls instructions threaded with nautical euphemisms you suspect might be critiques of St. Augustine's prose. You pry open eyelids glued by salt, sit up against the mast, and discover that Benedictine has claimed your cloak as bedding. Dislodging a possessive donkey before dawn turns out to be a two-step liturgy. First, prayer. Second, brisk negotiation with a carrot. You possess no carrot, so prayer must do. Below deck, the fragrant mingling of cheese, damp timber, and unwashed sailor is upgrading from purgatory to speculative hell. Salarius stands amid barrels preaching notes on rind fluctuation as though he were Aquinas with a dairy fetish. An argument has erupted about whether sea motion induces a saintly funk or outright heresy in soft cheeses. The debate ends when Wolfstand demonstrates that too much funk spontaneously generates maggots. He calls it proof of apostolic decay. Salarius calls it texture. You retreat to fresh air, deciding theology tastes better without larvae. On the forecastle, Euphemia checks bandages while humming a lullaby banned by 2 dioceses for encouraging excessive optimism. She hands you a small jar of amber liquid. Ginger and wormwood, she whispers. Drink or rub on your stomach, whichever suffers most. You opt to drink, potion scalding a path down your throat like righteous indignation. Moments later, the horizon stops tilting, which feels suspiciously miraculous. Dark humor darts through your mind. Perhaps monasteries outlaw melody, because the real healing powers lie in disobedient songs. Isabel calls all hands, charts inked on goat skin, corners nibbled by who knows what. Now display a cyclone symbol swirling across your intended route like the devil's fingerprint. Summer storm, she announces, big enough to baptize everything that floats. We can tack north and lose 2 days, or ride it like a drunken angel. Amalric, perched in the rigging, punches the air in favor of drunken angels. Celarius votes for knots, meaning cheese maturation time. The donkey abstains by relieving itself. You, feeling the lingering twinge of monastic caution, raise a timid hand for the northern detour, but are outvoted by every sailor whose pay depends on timely delivery of illicit dairy. Preparations begin. Isabel orders reefing sail. Ropes creak like confessions under torture. Wolfstan lashes barrels, crates, and a cat who refuses harness by vanishing entirely. You secure the bishop's chalice inside a wool sock, both for padding and because poetic justice demands holy vessels smell of feet. Amalric descends with a coil of spare lines, eyes gleaming stormlust. He slaps your shoulder hard enough to relocate sins, then clambers back up, torchless but grinning. By mid-morning, the sky has turned the color of old lead. Thunder mutters like a disgruntled prior reciting half-forgotten psalms. First rain arrives hesitant, then furious. Drops drum the deck, raising steam from sun-soaked planks. Isabel ties the wheel steady and yells, "Hold tight to something you don't mind dying with." You grab the rail and mentally apologize for drafting the rule of Benedict into a travel brochure of failure. The storm hits like the wrath of an archivist discovering coffee rings on parchment. Wind roars, masts groan, and waves vault the bulwark to baptize you in salt. The barge bucks, pitching you forward. You slam into a cleat and taste blood, iron gall shot. A coil of rope whips free, serpent-like cracking past your ear. You remember that martyrdom stories seldom mention vomit, yet seasickness crashes through the crew in waves of its own. Brother Celarius, kneeling among barrels, prays to Saint Ursula, patroness of improbable deliverances, while gifting the deck his breakfast barley in intervals. You crawl toward the companionway, but a wall of water sweeps you sideways, pinning you against Benedictine's flank. The donkey brays an operatic vibrato. To your eternal credit, you do not reply in kind. Overhead, sails tear with a sigh like old linen habits given to novices, and Isabel curses each rip as though reciting genealogies of sin. She orders the storm jib hoisted. Amalric swings from rigging, a silhouette framed by lightning, rope in teeth, wild as any crusading saint. Time unspools into sensations, the cold slap of water, the salt sting in eyes, the deck lurching like an unrepentant drunk, the chatter of prayer in 10 languages, as sailors revisit every deity hedged against. You catch yourself reciting the Sleep Channel intro, dim the lights, find a fan for gentle humming, and laugh hysterically until spray chokes the sound. Dark humor thrives in low oxygen. A wave smashes the starboard quarter. The world inverts. You tumble, weightless, then collide with the deck as the barge rights itself. Pain flares down your arm. You fear a fracture, but fingers wiggle. A crate bursts near your head, disgorging peppercorns that bounce like frantic scripture punctuation. Wolfstan skids by, eyes pupils of pure fear, yet still clutching 2 cheese wheels as though flotation devices of last resort. Lightning knifes the mainmast, splitting the night day and splintering wood, but the mast holds, scorched, defiant. Euphemia appears, drenched, pressing a rag to a sailor's scalp. Blood dilutes to pink rivulets swirling around her boots. She shouts something about stitches, but wind devours words. She sees your arm, snaps a splint from broken spar, and ties it to your forearm with a strip torn from her own habit. In that moment, you realize vows can be transmuted. Silence into courage, obedience into mercy, poverty into reckless generosity. Hours or centuries later, the storm releases its grip. Rain thins, wind slackens to a wounded whistle. The sea still heaves, but the violence has rippled onward to plague other sinners. Isabel staggers to middeck, surveys damage, then grins a grin that splits salt-cracked lips. She floats, she rasps, and so do we. A ragged cheer rises, half sob, half laugh, wholly alive. Dusk creeps beneath retreating clouds, unveiling a sky punched full of stars, each one bright as newly polished chalice silver. You help pump bilge until arms shake. Water gurgles out, tinged pink with blood and wine from ruptured barrel. Hilarious mourns the spillage like murdered saints, but Isabel reminds him that lost cargo lightened the ship at the worst moment. Call it tide by drowning. Below deck, you discover the cheese cache largely intact, though one wheel now bears a lightning-shaped burn. Hilarious christens it Stromboli pecor mortis, claims charred rind will sell as penitent delicacy. You wonder whether labeling sin as flavor constitutes blasphemy or marketing. Meals are cobbled from storm-beaten provisions, hardtack soaked in brandy, a sliver of burnt cheese, and ginger tincture for dessert. Benedictine receives extra oats for heroism. The cat reappears, dry and smug, carrying a stunned flying fish as offering to maritime gods. No one asks where it hid during Tempest. Some mysteries guard their own legend. Night watch rotates. You volunteer, arm splinted but serviceable. Standing at bow, map tucked in oilskin beneath tunic, you trace constellations Captain Isabel taught. The wheel, 7 stars shaped like a round of cheese. The compass, 4 spiky points. And the silent tongue, a crooked dagger of light. You whisper commentary to the stars, lecturing like you once whispered sermons onto vellum. Because out here, words vanish into wind, leaving only intent. Footsteps approach. Isabel, cloak billowing. She hands you a small leather pouch. Inside, clink coins stamped with that great crozier seal. Found these behind false planking, she says. Your abbot's offshore savings account. Figured you might invest differently. You finger the coins, heavy with hypocrisy. I could buy absolution, you joke. She replies, buy ink and paper. Write absolution for yourself. She leaves you to moral arithmetic. Perhaps you'll use coin to bribe a Cypriot librarian for time among scrolls unsinged by censorship. Or fund a hospital where silence is optional and cheese medicinal. Dreaming such speculation, you almost miss the silhouette on horizon. Sails black against starlight, paralleling your course. At first, you think them phantoms of the storm, but then a lantern flashes thrice. Code the monastery used for midnight passages. The bishop? Or pirates working in tandem with clandestine clerics? Either way, peril lingers. You alert Isabel. She studies the shadow through a spyglass, spits. Fast sloop, light cannon, no colors. Might be corsairs smelling our spice. Hilarious blanches, spice is life to cheese. Amalric flexes, rope-burned arms, eager for confrontation. Isabel orders lamps doused. The crew moves like whispers. She plots a course skirting shoals an unarmed merchant wouldn't dare. We'll give them rocks for supper, she says. The next hours pivot on courage disguised as recklessness. the Saint Apocrypha slips toward a reef labyrinth known as the Seven Thieves, so named because each rock has stolen ships into shattered prayers. Waves tumble over jagged fangs. Foam glows ghost green. Isabel's helm work is a sermon on audacity. She threads channels narrower than monastic dogma, each shift of rudder punctuated by Amalric's lookout shrieks. Port a hair. Starboard by God's eyelash. The pursuer hesitates at reef's mouth. Shadow sails furl and pivot, unwilling to gamble hull against stone. You exhale, shoulders drooping as tension seeps away like bilge. When clear water returns, so does dawn. Looming rose across the east, staining every ragged sail with improbable hope. Cyprus is still distant, but the air warms. You smell citrus orchards hitchhiking on wind. Captain Isabel announces a day of repairs and Thanksgiving. She exempts you from duty. Splinted arm needs rest. But you join anyway, patching sail tears with linen strips ripped from the abbot's decrees. Osbert would be proud of the marginalia now catching sunlight above a heretic crew. By noon, the Saint Apocrypha limps more proudly than many whole vessels. Euphemia brews infirmary wine with honey and ginger. She toasts storm babies and vow breakers alike. Even Benedictine receives a cup, poured over oats to avoid litigation. Laughter rings unshackled. For a moment you consider that maybe freedom is not a place, Cyprus or otherwise, but a direction, charted each dawn anew. Still, shadows lurk beyond rail. Unanswered bells, fraudulent charters, the bishop's wrath. Yet the ocean's breath makes revenge feel provincial. You roll the map, tuck it safe, and speak aloud, a luxury now as common as breath. Let tomorrow's sins find me ready. The breeze plucks the words, spinning them out across waves until they belong to no tongue, no rule, only the everlasting conversation between wind and water. And somewhere beyond horizon, where vineyards cliff over turquoise coves, a monastery bell will eventually ring, complaining into empty cloisters that once echoed your footsteps. But by then, you hope, the only vows you keep will be those you write yourself, and the only silence you practice will be chosen, not decreed. Mid-afternoon sunlight slants across patched canvas, dappling the deck in gold that looks suspiciously like forgiveness. Repairs from last night's mauling continue. Amalric resplices rigging with the zeal of a monk, braiding rosaries. Wolfstan hems torn sailcloth with thread stolen from the abbot's vestments, and Euphemia rewraps your arm, reminding you that swelling is simply flesh, performing a very small miracle. Captain Isabel finishes counting casualties, none fatal, many bruised. One sailor, convinced, lightning rearranged his opinions on predestination and pronounces the Saint Apocrypha fit to limp another 100 leagues. She does not mention the pursuing sloop again, but her eyes scan horizons the way confessors scan faces, searching for guilt that has not yet spoken. You retreat to the quarterdeck to examine the pouch of grape crozier coins, flipping one between thumb and bandaged forefinger. Stamped on the reverse is a Latin motto translating to "Silence buys eternity." You snort. Silence bought a lightning-struck mast, a splinted arm, and a cargo hold that smells like Satan's picnic basket. You consider discarding the coin, but decide even hypocritical silver can be melted into honest spoons. Besides, the bishop's face would pucker like sour milk if he ever discovered his secret slush fund financing your wine bill. Celarius hails you from below, beckoning with a cheese knife brandished as pointer. In the hold, he reveals his latest epiphany, a small swivel gun bolted to the gunwale, barrel borrowed from a broken bilge pump, muzzle lined with tin previously tasked to keep weevils out of hardtack. The ammunition, he explains, will be cannonballs of compressed curd, specifically the Stromboli Picor Mortis Wheel Lightning tattooed last night. A hard crust, plenty of mass, and he claims the righteous stench of martyrdom. You attempt to calculate whether theology is compatible with physics, but decide such doubts belong to calmer water. Near dusk, Amalric, acting lookout, rings the ship's bell twice, a code for uninvited sermon approaching. Everyone scrambles. On the eastern horizon, the sloop returns, sails black against orange sky, sliding across waves like a quill across vellum. Through Isabel's spyglass, its deck bristles with silhouettes in monastic cowls. Apparently, the bishop ran out of mercenaries and pressed novices into naval service. You count at least one light cannon and a banner that reads, Silentium aut nulla pax, silence or no peace. Someone should tell them slogans work better without mixed metaphors. Isabel orders battle stations, which on this vessel translates to creative improvisation and a willingness to accept absurdity as tactic. Wolfstan douses lantern wicks in wine, planning incendiary flares. Euphemia fills glass bottle with ginger tincture, volatile enough to double as firebombs, soothing enough to treat burns afterward. Salarius loads the curd cannon, ramming cheese until it squeaks. Benedictine is lashed near the stern, both to stabilize trim and because a braying donkey provides excellent psychological warfare. Wind deserts you at the worst possible hour, sails sag, rigging rattles like teeth. The sloop ghosts closer under oars. Moonlight paints the novices' faces. They row in eerie silence, eyes wide, cheeks puffed with effort they dare not vocalize. You imagine the abbot promising indulgences per stroke. Captain Isabel, unencumbered by vows, yells an invitation at them to rethink career choices. No answer, only oars clacking like rosary beads on wood. The first cannon shot whistles overhead, splashing harmlessly astern. Wolfstan lights a wine-soaked rag, hurls a bottle. It arcs, shatters on the sloop's prow, blooms green flame. The novices do not scream, but their rowing falters. Silence proves poor insulation against surprise. Isabel orders the curd cannon swung round. Calarius yanks the lanyard. Stromboli Pecor Mortis departs the muzzle in a gout of sparks, spinning like a disgraced halo. Mid-flight, the burnished rind catches moonlight, a meteor of fermented audacity, and smacks the sloop's sail with a wet thwunk. Cloth tears, curd explodes into a snowstorm of pungent shrapnel. At this, the vow of silence fails. A chorus of gagging erupts, half cough, half prayer. You seize the moment, grabbing a speaking trumpet fashioned from a broken bucket rim. Dear brothers, you shout, voice raw as deck timber. Your obedience is admirable, but your bishop cannot smell what he sails toward. Jump ship now, confess later, and we'll fish you out with ginger tea. A beat passes. One novice stands, raises hands, then dives overboard with the grace of a dropped hymn book. Two others follow. The bishop, visible on the quarterdeck, flaps his arms like a furious heron, but novices continue abandoning him, splashing into star-lit swells. The sloop's cannon fires again, this time low. The ball punches your rail, spraying splinters. Amalric swings on a rope, drops onto the sloop's bowsprit, and tosses a net of peppercorns through the forward hatch. Moments later, muffled sneezes burst from below decks, escalating into a symphony of unsuppressed misery. A final volley of cheese rounds shreds the mainsail. Defeated, the bishop orders retreat, But with half his crew swimming and the rest convulsing in peppered agony, the sloop spins broadside and drifts. Isabel spares them a lamp for rescue, muttering, "Even tyrants deserve a lighthouse made of pity." Your crew heaves novices from water, hauling them aboard one by one. Their expressions vacillate between terror and relief as they realize speech is not taxed here. Euphemia blankets them in cloaks, doses them with ginger, instructs them to cough freely. Some weep at the luxury of sound. Celarius welcomes them with slivers of cheese, perhaps the most aggressive evangelism in maritime history. By dawn, the survivors sit on deck muttering prayers of uncertain allegiance, while Isabel's sailors scrub curd from rigging. Sunrise reveals the ridge of cypress on the horizon, hills dove-gray capped with honeyed stone monasteries that may or may not honor vow entanglements. A land breeze drifts warm, perfumed with pine and lemon blossoms, carrying promise and, faintly, goat bells. You feel your chest loosen, as though the ribs themselves were laces finally untied. Captain Isabel claps your shoulder. "Half a day," she says. "Enough time to decide whether you'll dock as merchants, pilgrims, or philosophical accidents." Negotiations unfold over breakfast, hardtack fried in olive oil, a morning miracle courtesy of a rescued novice who confesses to secret culinary passions. Isabel vows to register the cargo as experimental sacramentals, which local officials, accustomed to relics that smell worse, will likely approve for a modest bribe. The bishop's chalice will become a donation to whichever church offers best sanctuary. As for the great crozier coins, Isabel suggests investing in a coastal vineyard rumored for robust reds and moral ambiguity. You imagine a label, Fugitives Reserve, pairs well with regret. At midday, the Saint Apocrypha enters a turquoise harbor guarded by 2 crumbling towers, trading gossip with gulls. Docks bustle, Greek fishermen curse in nets, Armenian traders haggling over silk, Venetian agents pretending not to spy. Your crew draws stares, monks out of habit, sailors out of uniform, donkey out of patience. A port inspector sidles closer, quill twitching. Before he can speak, Benedictine releases a bray that echoes off limestone cliffs, scattering whatever rhetorical question the inspector had planned. Wolfstan slips a coin into the man's ledger, labels cargo perishable virtue, and guides the donkey past as if bureaucracy were merely another reef to skirt. On shore, whitewashed alleys zag upward, cluttered with fig vendors and gossip's washerwomen. The novices, still damp, stare at fruit stalls as though Eden restocked. Celarius darts into the first taverna, returning with amphorae and a grin large enough to bruise cheeks. Amalric barters his torch, now more sentimental than practical, for a silver earring shaped like a compass rose. Euphemia purchases fresh ginger, claims it for medicine. No one questions that half the root finds its way into her cup. You climb a stairway to a hilltop chapel overlooking the bay. Inside, mosaics shimmer, saints with open mouths singing, an image nearly heretical in your memory. You light a taper, kneel on cool marble and attempt a prayer, but words spill instead. Unfiltered, unpunctuated relief poured straight into colored light. When finished, you discover the chapel empty save for a novice you rescued, now kneeling beside you. He whispers, "Thank you for the noise." You realize that in escaping silence you have become contagion. Voices will spread like song. Back at the docks, Isabel finalizes mooring papers. She approaches you offering a parchment. Partnership share in the Saint Apocrypha. "A ship needs a chronicler," she says. Someone to log storms, revolts, and cheeses, legendary enough to sink bishops. Your arm throbs, but in a good, alive way. You sign with a flamboyant quill stroke, dotting the I so aggressively, ink spatters your boot. Evidence that writing can still get messy outside scriptoriums. Evening descends, violet over water turned molten orange. The rescued novices perform an impromptu chant at the rail, not silent but soft, harmonizing with marketplace chatter, donkey brays, and the distant clink of amphorae. Their Latin words translate roughly to, "Blessed be the belly that laughs at fear." You join on the final amen, voice scratchy yet sure. Captain Isabel toasts the horizon with the bishop's chalice, now filled with Cypriot wine. "Tonight we feast," she declares. "Tomorrow we sell contraband sanctity, and the day after that we choose new sins." Laughter erupts, rolling across deck boards into star-tipped air. You lean over the bulwark, tasting salt, citrus, and a future fermented in storm and disobedience. Somewhere behind, a monastery bell may still ring accusatory quarters, but its echo cannot cross this sea of spoken words. You unwrap your arm splint, flex fingers, and feel pain recede like ebb tide. In its place swells possibility, to write histories boring enough to soothe, daring enough to keep eyes open until the last sentence. And when night settles, you plan to stand at the tavern door, raise a cup, and invite strangers, sailors, monks, runaway novices, to tell stories out loud without fine ledger or vow. You will listen, laugh, maybe even yawn, because sometimes freedom is boring, and that, too, is a miracle. By late afternoon, the Cypriot sun has slipped into its honey phase, and the Saint Apocrypha bobs at birth, painting ripples the color of burnt copper. You stand on the quay, supervising the offloading of your unlikely loot. Wheels of singed pecorino exhaling sulfuric theology, amphorae of contraband commandaria glinting like stained glass organs, and a bishop's chalice wrapped in a donkey blanket that still smells faintly of Benedictine's existential angst. Harbor boys pinch their noses yet grin. The cat saunters ahead as if it personally discovered trade economics. When the last crate thumps onto the stones, Captain Isabel signs the manifest with a flourish so piratical the customs clerk blushes, then slips your pouch of grape crozier coins into a ledger stamped paid, proof that bureaucracy can be bribed into poetry when greased with enough hypocrisy. A delegation from the local abbey arrives to inspect the experimental sacramentals. Their prior, a man whose beard braids itself into question marks, taps each cheese wheel with a tuning fork, listening for heresy in the echo. Celarius explains that the lightning-kissed rind imparts a sublime melancholy ideal for Lent. The prior crosses himself, then buys the entire batch for twice the asking price, citing liturgical urgency. Euphemia sells half her ginger tincture to village midwives, who swear its aroma alone encourages reluctant infants to exit the womb singing. Meanwhile, Wolfston auctions fragments of the shattered sloop sail as relics of recent silence, and gullible merchants pay by the square inch. By the end of commerce, your ragtag crew is richer than any of you have been morally prepared to be, and moral preparation was never your strong suit. Celebration convenes at a hillside tavern whose terrace overlooked terraced vineyards cascading toward turquoise sea. Clay lamps flicker, mandolins noodle. Novices you rescued from vow strangulation discover that language expands when lubricated with citrus wine. One of them, Brother Abelard, formerly mute record keeper, recites bawdy riddles in 3 languages, each concluded by a donkey bray punchline courtesy of Benedictine holding court at the stairs. Captain Isabel, cheeks rosy, drafts a future itinerary featuring Alexandria, Rhodes, and any port with lax bookkeeping. Amalric arm wrestles a Turkish sailor for the right to tattoo a compass rose over his lightning scar. Amalric wins, argues the design needs 5 points, and vows to name each after forbidden spices. You sip wine and feel your injured arm complain less, as though joints too appreciate a good plot twist. The next morning, Isabel marches you uphill to meet Nikitas, proprietor of the estate whose vines perfume the entire bay. Nikitas greets you beneath a pergola draped in grapes, swollen like gossip. He eyes the bishop's coins, declares them excellent seed money, and offers partnership. Invest, bottle under the label Fugitivus, include tasting notes that hint at thunder, ginger, and scandal. Salarius tests the must, pronounces it worthy of canonization, then suggests aging barrels while monks chant inside for acoustic complexity. Nikitas shrugs. On Cyprus, eccentricity is merely hustle wearing a cloak. Contract sealed with a palm spit and a wink, you realize you are now co-owners of potential respectability. An unnerving development. Night drapes velvet over the island. Crickets fiddle. Distant bells toll complacent hours. On the ship's deck, you help Isabel tally profits when a parchment-wrapped stone lands between you with a clack. The note, penned in furious uncials, bears the bishop's seal and a generous spatter of what might be pepper-induced tears. He denounces you as pirates, apostates, and cheese-wielding anarchists, demanding immediate return of novices and chalice, or face excommunication so comprehensive your descendants will be born censored. Amalric suggests replying with a cannonball of curd. Euphemia proposes sending a care package of ginger ointment for the bishop's inflamed dignity. You vote for diplomacy spiced with mockery, a letter containing a single silver coin and the phrase "silence buys eternity." Conversation buys wine. Choose wisely. At dawn, you organize a procession to the local monastery, returning the novices as free men who may join or depart at will. Most elect to stay in Cyprus, lured by sunshine and syllables. The Cypriot abbot, intrigued by their stories, decrees a new order of the resonant word. Vows include daily storytelling, mandatory laughter at Vespers, and a weekly cheese-tasting exam. You donate the bishop's chalice to their refectory. In gratitude, they promise to ring their bells loud enough to irritate any passing sloop, flying ecclesiastical colors. Back aboard, preparations begin for the Apocrypha's next voyage. Isabel secures a contract to transport citrus and manuscripts to Alexandria, while Wolfstan retrofits the curd cannon into a dual-purpose lime juicer. Salarius stocks a microcellar in the hold, labeling shelves, sermon starters, and blasphemous blues. Amalric teaches novices how to splice rope and metaphors simultaneously. You draft the ship's new charter, every crew member entitled to speak, sing, or swear at any hour, provided they help scrub decks afterward. Clause 7 forbids management of silence as a commodity. Clause 8 allocates space for a traveling library of scrolls, too argumentative for mainland scriptoriums. Evening before departure, you hike to the lookout cliff with the cat at your heels. Below, vineyards glow under moon milk, each row a line of verse waiting to be read aloud. You pull out the map that once guided conspiracies and slash a new route across it, ink shimmering wet. Cyprus, Crete, Alexandria, to be continued. For the first time, the parchment feels less like escape plan, more like invitation. In the hush, you hear monastery bells drift across water. They sound different here, open-throated, almost amused, proof that distance can equal translation. Return to town finds the tavern buzzing. The first barrels of Fugitivus have been tapped, and locals toast to the taste of thunder. You raise a cup and spot Brother Osbert seated in a corner, eyes clearer than you remember. He journeyed after you by merchant galley, guided only by rumor and the scent of ginger. The abbot has resigned, he reports softly. Apparently running a silent monastery without novices feels like debating yourself in an empty bathhouse. You ask what replaced the old regime. Osbert smiles. They're turning it into a library where scribes can argue margins out loud. You clink cups in astonished glee and invite him to chronicle storms from a less dizzying vantage than a bell tower. He agrees, provided the cat proofreads. Departure day dawns with gull fanfare. Dock workers load citrus crates. Benedictine supervises, munching on stray oranges, each bite a siren for flies. A small crowd gathers to bless the voyage with words instead of holy water, exactly as you like it. The Cypriot abbot presents a painted icon of St. Lawrence, holding not a gridiron but a wheel of cheese. May your curds never curdle, he intones. Salarius wipes away a tear, claiming its rind dust. The ship slips from harbor, sails taut with a breeze, scented of resin and beginnings. By mid-channel, the island recedes to a storybook backdrop. Isabel orders canvases trimmed, then hands you the logbook, the first blank page since lightning struck your life sideways. You dip quill, pause, and begin. Let it be recorded that on this day we left behind the tyranny of unsounded words and carried forward barrels of fermented laughter. The ink flows smooth. Sentences march free of margins that once caged them. You write until wrist cramps, then pass the quill to Brother Abelard, who adds a limerick about a monk and a mule that would scandalize every council north of Crete. Sunset silhouettes the crew at rail, each silhouette humming, some off-key, all unashamed. Amalric's new compass earring catches last light, flashing like a private star. Wolfstan unveils the ship's freshly painted figurehead, a cat clutching a quill astride a flying cheese wheel, eyes narrowed in conspiratorial mirth. Laughter ripples, sails billow, and the sea answers with a hush that feels less like silence than respectful listening. Night deepens, constellations wheel overhead. Isabel sets the helm on a course that splits the Milky Way. Below deck, barrels creak lullabies. Above, the mast hums wind psalms no scripter ever dared annotate. You lean against the taffrail, inhaling salt and ginger, and realize sleepiness curling behind your eyes. The good kind, earned, not imposed. Remembering old habits, you offer final guidance to no one in particular. So, before you settle comfortably, take a moment to like the stars, subscribe to the wind, and comment to the darkness where you're listening from and what hour it might be. Now dim the moon, let the waves provide their gentle hum, and drift with us into tomorrow's pages. The sea obliges, rocking the Saint Apocrypha like a cradle lined with ink and promise. Your eyelids sag, punctuation blurs into constellations. Somewhere forward, Benedictine brays a final editorial remark, and the cat curls atop the compass box, purring footnotes. As slumber claims you, one thought flickers. Boring history never sounded so alive. And with that, the chapter and the vow of silence close quietly, replaced by the ever-widening conversation of wind, wood, and waking dreams. You arrive precisely as the tower bell tolls 8, the bronze note flapping through the damp autumn air like a one-winged bat, and then dying somewhere above the refectory roof. Before you even adjust your cloak, a tiny housekeeping matter, if you find yourself strangely soothed by whispered tales of medieval mildew, do click the little thumbs up and subscribe, but only if my gentle droning actually pleases you. While you are at it, drop a comment telling me where on this spinning globe you are listening from and what time the sand slips through your hourglass. Always fascinating to chart our sleepy congregation. Now dim the lights, maybe set a fan humming for that soft background buzz, and join me as we tiptoe into tonight's monastic misadventure. The porter, a man whose face has fully committed to the shape of his frown, admits you with the sort of silent nod usually reserved for funerals and unusually long chess matches. The Cloister walk is slick with rain and goose droppings, though no one has the decency to warn you because, technically, no one is allowed to speak. This Benedictine house keeps a strict nocturnal silence. Words after sunset cost 3 Hail Marys each, payable at dawn. By dawn, of course, you will be too tired to remember the debt, which is why the abbot maintains a small ledger of vocal crimes beside his bed. He calls it the word count, and chuckles at his own joke. No one else dares to, mostly because no one has permission to inhale that deeply. Your cell for the night is a former broom closet, still scented faintly of straw, soap ash, and existential regret, and lit by a single beeswax candle that refuses to stand upright. You are to serve as guest scribe during the graveyard shift, an ironic title given the resident graveyard is only 20 paces away and populated more densely than the dormitory. Your first task is to inspect a stack of damp parchment, curled like lasagna sheets. Then copy a sermon against gluttony, while your stomach demonstrates gluttony's counter-argument with enthusiastic growls. On the wall hangs a painted crucifix. Christ looks down at your hunger pangs with that same inscrutable expression he saves for people who pray for their team to win the jousting tournament. The scriptoria rules are simple. Quills must be trimmed no longer than the average crow's feather. Ink pots must be covered when not in use, lest the resident spiders mistake them for trendy plunge pools. And under no circumstances may you correct a brother's spelling errors. Medieval orthography is a doctrine, not a suggestion. Brother Osbert, whose eyesight resembles moldy glass, has already rendered psalm as psalm in 8 places. Correcting him would spark an ecclesiastical incident on par with the Great Schism, but quieter and with more sighing. You obediently replicate his mistakes, adding your own flourish, a discreet doodle of a 2-headed goat nibbling a hymnal in the margin. Nobody will notice. Marginalia is the medieval equivalent of a sarcastic tweet, doomed to be discovered centuries later by bored graduate students. At 9:30, a bell clangs again. Sub-Prior Hamo insists on random bell ringing to prevent sloth, and you file into the chapel for compline. The chapel smells of wet wool, stale beeswax, and the collective apology of 50 men who subsist on turnip broth. Candles flicker, illuminating faces that look carved from leftover bread dough. The chant begins, a low drone in Latin, but because of the vow of silence, it is performed entirely inside each monk's head. From the outside, the brethren appear to be participating in a synchronized yawn. Midway through the silent hymn, somebody's knees pop like a musket. Brother Ethelric glares, though it is impossible to know if he is offended by the noise or simply has resting judgment face. Back in the cloister, a draft snakes along the flagstones, rearranging your hem into an impromptu windsock. You fetch firewood from the courtyard pile and exercise in nocturnal tripping hazards. The wood is so damp it whimpers when introduced to flame, but after coaxing it with a liturgical glare, you manage a reluctant fire that coughs more than it blazes. Smoke creeps up the chimney and escapes at roof level, where it politely mingles with the midnight fog like two introverts at a masquerade. You return to your desk reeking of pine pitch and premature arthritis. On parchment line 16, you are supposed to copy, "Blessed are the watchful," yet your quill blurts, "Basted are the watchful," an accidental culinary prophecy. You leave it. Future scholars will debate whether the slip was allegory or dinner suggestion.